Phenomenality, indication without representation. I've been thinking about what constitutes mentality, what makes mind, what makes something belong to that kind. And Brentano thinks it's intentionality, and I want to give everyone some more thoughts about what it is, because intentionality might not be the only thing that's available on the market. So here's my outline. So I first talk about phenomenology and accessibility. It will be an interaction between something like experiences and so philosophy of mind and epistemology. Accessibility, this is something from NetBlock, which will be very clear that you see that. And then I'll mix perception and affectivity, emotions and mood and sympathy in my discussion to bring out the model that I work on in experience and interpretation. And then I'll talk again something more on the epistemology side about how evidence and understanding interacts. And of course, it will all build up from the previous session. And then expectation and verification, that's you'll see if we were to be trapped in something like a sense data way of thinking or sensation, perception, how these all relate to one another, and what's the issue here with intentionality. And some people would call that the issue might be the issue over non-conceptual content, but I don't know whether that's even content. So these are the issues that I want to talk about. And then confirmation hypothesis, that's also something from epistemology and in relation to perception and intentionality. And that's where I would bring out the difference between the relation, indication, and representation. The former, indication, I hope it's not an intentional relation, and I'll illustrate with some example, and I will end with the difference between mentality and vitality, life. You can have life without having mind. So that's the outline. So let me begin the first session. So I advocate a kind of qualia realism that's maybe a very robust form of realism about qualia. So this is just what NetBlock did in his 1995 paper, I think. So now you're listening to me, you're thinking about what is he going to say, and then contemplating all these things. And I want to bring your attention to your background noise. So just what's at the background? Maybe you're hearing some air conditioning noises or the fan that's moving, or maybe anything that's at the background. And if you notice the difference, then I want to point out that there had been some phenomenology or phenomenal consciousness of experiences that are not accessed because they are at the background. You haven't been using the information from your maybe perception, your including your auditory, especially auditory, without using them. But it's been there. It's been impacting your sense organs, and your sense organs are functioning. So it's producing something in your mind. So a NetBlock thinks that that's a kind of some phenomenal consciousness that's not accessed, and not the information is not used for global control. That's how we would put that. So roughly, qualia are not exhausted by information processing. Well, this is controversial because whether what happens at the background is also information processing. That'll be a point that I will have to tackle with. Of course, you might also argue, well, maybe attention constitutes experiences without you having attended to your background noise. Oh, you didn't even have those experiences. So that's an argument that NetBlock would have to reply. But I would assume with NetBlock that those phenomenology that were not accessed, they are there instead of needing constitution by attention. So we don't have to think about our experiences in order to experience them. So that's the kind of realism that I would presuppose, and to use that to understand blind sight. This is again not the orthodox view. So a blind sight patient, I guess most people would know that they suffer brain trauma, and there's a part of their visual field. When you present things to them, they can't tell you what they're seeing, but those perceptual information that's been imparting through their sense organs, although it's not processed in conscious reasoning, they can report, or they're seeing it biases decision. They have better than chance guessing about if they were presented with a false choice. Are you seeing, I don't know, maybe a square or a circle? Just guess, and they have a higher than chance correct guesses, and that's the empirical fact. So maybe phenomenology outruns its knowledge. So maybe their perceptual organs are maybe functioning, but there are some form of malfunctioning with the higher order monitoring or accessing the through the experience. They can't reflect on what they're feeling, so it doesn't enter conscious reasoning. That's a hypothesis about what blind sight subjects are. So we can be the mental state as a kind of qualia that we're in without knowledge of what it is like to be in it. There's something it is like to be in a certain mental state without us always knowing what it is like. So that's the kind of robust realism about qualia that I presupposes. And cognitive science as a whole, because, well, it's a science of cognition. And we think about cognitive state, and cognitive state, a state that's about the world, intentionality. And we need that because the enterprise of cognitive science is, most people would use computational simulation or even a computational theory, so we can operate on cognitive state. And in order to operate on cognitive state that's about the world, we need representation. So the whole cognitive science is about representation. But then there comes affectivity, affection, and there's also affective science. But usually I think people would say that it's under cognitive science. And emotion and feelings, it biases behaviors. And I suggest that without information processing, some would disagree outright because, well, that's already information processing. Or modification of behaviors are information processing. And that's what I want to argue against, or at least if I succeeded, it's not the kind of information processing that's representational. It's mere a relation of indication. Okay. So I'll begin to go into the 4 levels of perception or other things. So experiences and sympathy, and experiences and interpretation. To bring out what I want to say, sympathy, it's a little bit like you mirror neurons thing, monkey see, monkey do thing. So when smelly tofu, it's a delicacy in Hong Kong or in Guangzhou, and I guess most people wouldn't have tried it. It's strange. You ferment tofu, and in a way that it's smelly. People have different tastes for that, like durian. And when you see someone, maybe you go to YouTube and see someone tasting that, you might be able to sympathize, to experience what they experience, the tongue tactility that it's eating, the mouth feel. But then what is likeness, because you've never tried smelly tofu, you might not know the experience or even experience what they are experiencing. And when we see others do things, we might simulate others' behavior with our own experience of ingestion. When we eat, that's how we eat. And from a past experience, we can experience what others are experiencing. But there is an experiential poverty of taste because we've never tasted what smelly tofu is like. So however much we sympathize, there is something missing. And that experience sharing, that at the level of experience, at the raw level of processing, that's something I want to use to target, in the end, perception and sensation. And empathy, it's something a little bit different. That's, of course, we have experience. We might, through others' experience, we experience something as well. But then there's feeling, and the the dynamic of feeling is that, oh, I might, when I try smelly tofu, I have certain experience, gastro experience, and it's me who decide whether, well, maybe through past conditioning, or I might like it or dislike it, and that disliking, maybe neither. That's a feeling that that's, I think, is dynamic instead of a static way of experiencing certain thing. And to illustrate that, I can talk about empathy, because when others are suffering, I might experience as well, but how I am to feel, even when I'm sharing others' experience, I might feel with the sufferer and have empathy as what it is, as what people typically understand the term. But a psychopath, they experience, well, it's like if mirror neurons enables us to understand others' mind through simulation, we can simulate others' mind or simulate others' experience without feeling for others' experience. You can somewhat through sympathy know others are in pain, but you feel for it. You enjoy the pain. So that's a divorce between a mind understanding other minds and how you feel experientially. So sympathy and experience relates to sensation in the following way. So naked cube, I guess most people know what it is. You see the naked cube, but sensation as something like a sense data, the patches of edges. It underdetermines perception, because if you try, and if you can flip the naked cube. So sensation underdetermines perception, and that interpretation of the experience of the sensation, it is a little bit like, I want to draw an analogy between that and affectivity. So it's like when you taste something new, you somewhat like you can decide. Of course, it's not that much up for control. That interpretation of whether the naked cube is facing you or facing away from you, I want to draw the analogy to feeling affectivities, and thus sensation stays at a lower level. And then there's the Mueller lines, and I think perception underdetermines condition, because you might know that it's an illusion, so you don't come to believe what perception disposes you to believe. And the cognitive impenetrability is like phobia, so you could have perception is a little bit like maybe emotion, but then even, and it is cognitively impenetrable. So I'm drawing this analogy between perception and emotion. And to go beyond and to talk about epistemology, perception, the moon illusion, as we all know, it's the same in terms of size, same sensation with same retinal excitation by light from the moon. When the moon is near the horizon and when it's up above the sky, it's actually excite the same area of on the retina. But then we have different perceptual experience. It is an experience as of a larger moon instead of a smaller moon, but we know the moon size is constant and evidence is factive. So the evidence is about the same fact that the moon is a certain size. So there could be perceptual experiences that vary, but given the perceptual experiences relate to evidence, these experience and evidence relate in a certain way. So and the objectivity of perceptual evidence is that, well, evidence is of a fact, and with evidence we will understand the fact, and there's a better understanding and a worse understanding. We have the evidence, and we are here to maybe a priori through our reasoning to think about the fact through the evidence. We could better understand it, we can understand it less, and we can even misunderstand it. And it's like perceptual evidence, right? We can have different perceptual evidence of the same fact. It's the moon illusion when you, the evidence of the moon size, it's different perceptual evidence in different situation at different time, but it is of the same fact. And it's so perceptual differences, perceptual evidence that are different will empower different understanding. We'll understand the moon in different way. And what I want to highlight is that when I grasp a fact through perception, well, by the way, I'm talking about this because it relates to intentionality, and knowledge is a way that a mental state manifests intentionality. Knowledge of the size of the moon in one situation and comparison of it across situations. So when you perceive the moon early in the morning, when it's just above the horizon, you perceive it of a certain size. It's a perception in one context, a knowledge of its size in one context, in one situation. And then if you were to compare that across situation, because you identify its size within that situation, and there's a problem if you were to compare that across situation. And however, when we measure things with an absolute ranking in something like a universal context that's across a context, that ranking would entail contextual ranking, because if something is larger than something else, then in every context, given the same distal distance, it will have the same ranking. But the other way around doesn't work, because even if the moon seems to be larger than the building, of course it is larger than the building, and then when it's high above, it seems to be smaller, but that ranking doesn't carry forward across different situations. So the contextuality of knowledge makes comparison different, and that's how experience, which is with a given a limited being, it's given within a context, it's within a situation. Experience and fact and the world and this experience, sensation, and knowledge, perception as the intentional state is different. And expectation, verification, it's more about experience again. So we can have same evidence with better understanding. That's what I've talked about. Like with better understanding, we will increase the precision of expectation, because when we have evidence and we understand what the world is, we will form expectation about what we're going to see. And I will still use the moon size example. So I make two observations at a different time. One early in the morning, so it's the moon is at the horizon, and then later on it's high up. And then I will have a projection about what my experience will be like later on. Yeah, I know the moon to be constant. It's I have object constancy, and I know it doesn't change shape in between, but I will project what my experience will be like at a later time. Maybe it's smaller than a pound, but larger than 5 pence. And that's one understanding of the evidence. And another understanding is to be even, because a 5 pence is smaller, a pence is larger. So if you understand your evidence better, you can form a more precise expectation, and that's at the experiential level instead of evidence is intentional about the world, but experience, it's how the circle seems to you. So I'm trying to distinguish these two things and how they interact. And of course, with experiences, we have we discriminate with experiences, because sometimes some experience will verify our expectation when but without me being sure whether it indeed verifying it. We could the size of the moon, I was expecting that to be that way, and indeed the experience verify my expectation, but I might still be confused because I can't distinguish minute differences, and therefore even we need the kind of power of discrimination and the right perceptual acuity to be able to discriminate whether an experience verify an expectation. So let's take sorting a steak as an example, right? Because when I sort a steak, there's an best amount of salt and versus no amount of salt. So from no to the best amount of salt, a difference in 1 grain. If I want add 1 more grain, I expect that to be a better steak because it approaches the best, without me being able to discriminate with my experience whether my expectation is met. So this is the interaction between experience and expectation. It also requires a certain level power of discrimination, and with that, the interaction between experience and the objective world through evidence. I can talk about expectation across time. It's something like phenomenality. When people do a the profile, how you approach it, you see, the object will enlarge. These are all the description of experience. So when you interact with an object, you have expectation across time, displacement. So how you move, the experience will change, how your experience will update as you locomote around an object. And edge detection, as we know from neuroscience, it's a profile of experience variation across times, because neuroscience reveals that some neuronal activation pattern across time, some set of pattern will excite a certain edge detecting neurons. So besides the cone and rods in the retina, there's also edge detection neurons that are activated when the experiences conform to a certain pattern across time. Because when you see an edge, it's not just random patches of pixels, right? Because it forms something objective. And so here's something about epistemology again, because I'm trying to get out from experience to the world. And besides the objective fact that will correlate with certain perceptual profile, because the fact about an object being a certain way interact with my displacement and how our experience update. And an object, it has constancy and displacement, and we can talk about the again perceptual spatial temporal perceptual profile. That's what I just mentioned. An event would be simply object interaction with spatial temporal reality. It's just object interacting with each other. And the causation perception would be I'm trying, because experience has no causation. It's just experience, update of experience, something like a Humean humanism. But then how do we get out from experience to the world? We can do that through some spatial temporal perceptual profile. Experience update and causation is also something important in the world. And now I'm trying to get to from my own experience, something like a sense data of the logical positivist sensationalism into the world. And if I have the world and I bring back my analogy between perception and emotion, I can also have the world in which there are other subjects, other subjectivity, and there are other agents, agency, because my sensation beyond not when it's not yet perception, I don't see objects, I only experience like patches of colors. But now I have the world and I have other subjectivity. I know other agents with mental state like me, and then an analogy between object and its objectivity. With human beings, it's the spatial temporal affective profile. It's something like if I move along the object, my experience will update a certain way. And now if I interact with a person, my experience of him, my affective experience of the person, him, her, will update a certain way. So when I interact with a person, when I form a hypothesis, given my knowledge of his character, I will, the affectivity constitute perceptual evidence of an action, because if I were to hypothesize a certain person with a certain character in a certain situation, doing a certain thing, it's not only pixels, it's behaviors, but it's not only behavior, because with my affectivity, with my sympathy, I can constitute my perceptual evidence as of behavior as in action and intentionality directed towards objects. So that's how I try to get out from experiences to the world. And again, to carry on with my point about epistemology, evidence distinguishes alternatives to hypothesis within context, because given the evidence that we have, we can confirm or disconfirm our hypothesis, and some evidence will distinguish as alternatives, so rule out an alternative hypothesis to confirm our hypothesis. But there are times at which we have the distinguishing evidence without knowing that it confirms it, because we are unable to know that it's distinguishing. And this is something that's related to reflection and a knowledge of knowledge, the KK thesis in epistemology in relation to mental state and intentionality. And I can also, to interact, because it's a dynamic situation, I can interact with the person or the object and make further hypothesis, test more, increase in value, maybe I get closer, make more observation, and I'll have clearer evidence. So that's evidence. We can talk about clarity, but experience, because there's no world, it's just experience, and it's unclear what clarity is when we only talk about experience. And now this is what I want to get at, indication versus representation. So here's the tracking relation. A tree rings, a naturally occurring tree. We know that it indicates tree age because the tree, given that it's in a place where it has robust differences in seasons, so in winter it grows its bark differently, and then in summer another way, and then over 1 year the bark will develop differently, and that's how tree rings indicate tree age, right? So, and it tracks tree ages, how old it is. The number of tree rings will be different. And on the other hand, the Gricean example, the natural meaning example, cloudy sky indicates it's going to rain soon. So because of the physics, initial condition with much condensed water vapor, and then you just wait a little bit, an increase of water vapor, and then it will rain. So supposedly, even Grice would think that the cloudy sky has a natural meaning. It means that it's going to rain, and some people think that in teleosemantics, tree ring, that indication, that what I call an indication relation, they think it's a representational relation and want to build a semantics on that, a teleosemantics. But I want to say that that's different. That tracking relation, that indication relation is different from having encoding information, because state of affairs like tree trunks and clouds in itself, a fact that they being that way, in a certain way, they don't carry any information. This is a controversial point because even in physics, they think that events carry information, but I disagree with that. It's constitution of evidence when epistemically accessed. It's how we use those state of affairs, like the number of tree rings, to understand the world, to investigate how old the tree is. It's our epistemic interaction that brings in that state of affairs into our mind, maybe through perception. That's how our evidence, perceptual evidence, carries information. But the tree ring itself does not carry information. That's what I'm going to say. But it tracks and it indicates the age of the tree. So in terms of epistemology, we understand the fact with the perceptual evidence of it, and the tree rings and cloudiness indicate without representation, because it's our perceptual evidence that represent the fact, but it's not the tree rings that represent it, although it tracks it and indicate it. So if you would see the flow, you see that what I want to get at is that experience, like and even mood, and that's I know that I apologize for being a little bit late for this conference. The people who talk about mood and whether it's about object and sensation, these things, for example, to use the example from emotion, we might feel distress, and distress tracks other suffering, but it differs from the dynamics of the mind, because I might have distress when others are suffering, but I might feel annoyed. Oh, come on, you are depressed. I don't want to talk to you. I want to focus on my Netflix movie. So it's a way in which the dynamics of the mind. It's the way that I interact with how I experience others' experience, how I share others' experience, right? And other suffering, you might feel distress, and then if you were to have anger, and it happens if the anger is fitting, that it's appropriate, that it's in the right situation, then it indicates injustice instead of representing injustice. And that's roughly the whole thing of the whole presentation. I want the main point of the presentation that's summarized in a nutshell. So you can have fitting anger, but it doesn't represent injustice. It indicates, it tracks, it indicates through tracking injustice, because if you have a fitting anger in a way that when there are no injustice, you don't have the anger. So that's how your indignation, of course, that's another word that people use, tracks whether there's justice or not in the world, whether there are injustice in the world. And having distinguished the difference between representation, of course, I think representation is intentional, and indication, that's where I part from Brentano. So life, we can have life, right? Like a physiology, a bodily a configuration that's vital, that has life, and a corpse. There's a difference between a physiology that's alive and otherwise. And because usually a living organism, it has some sort of sustenance, self-sustenance, and when it's with a bodily tissue damage, it will repair itself. It has autonomous reparation, and that's the indication of life. But you can have life without a mind, right? A plant, I think a plant is alive, right? It has life in biology. Part of biology studies plant, and but it doesn't have a mind. So biology and psychology, it's two things. You can have a life with a mind and without a mind. And of course, there could be a mind with and without self-referentiality. And that's something I will talk a little bit more about, an implication of what I want to say, because that's what I would say distinguishes two things that I think most people would have confused, would have mixed them up together. So suppose an animal, or maybe an amoeba, it is a system, right? A rather self-contained system, because when there's toxin, it will move away in self-preservation, but it doesn't think about itself. It's just a system at work, given its limited perspective, if it has a perspective at all, because it moves in self-preservation, at least the preservation of the cell as a system. So it has a limited perspective without representing the system. So it is from a perspective, but it doesn't represent the perspective, or it doesn't represent the system. It just works. It just moves around and avoid toxin and get nutrient. And that's a way in which something, even if, of course, I guess most people wouldn't think amoeba has a mind, but some lower animals, even if they have a mind, they can be at work. There could be a system at work without thinking about the system itself. It is just in the world. But self-referentiality is when a system represents itself, and if representation, some possible world semantics thing, that content is a set of possible world, and the system representation is a set. The representation, the content, is a set that includes itself embedded in an environment, and that relation, the self-representation, the representing the system in the environment, plays a certain conceptual role or representational role in the information processing, and that's something special about that. And of course, the famous John Perry example of the shopping cart example, you can represent someone polluting the supermarket without knowing that it's yourself, right? So you can represent that person correctly as polluting the environment without representing that as yourself. One difference is that the causal, the representation role in information it plays, it doesn't, well, if you were thinking about yourself as doing that, you would stop polluting the environment. So that's indexicality and self-referentiality, and I want to distinguish that from reflexivity, because I understand that most people would think reflexive mental state is mental state about the self, but like in Indian, in Buddhist meditative tradition, there's a sort of meditative luminosity in which you have full awareness, mental full awareness. Some people just say that it's full self-awareness, but let's say it's, I'll take away the word self yet, because it's a kind of awareness that's without thought. You're completely immersed in the moment. You're not thinking about anything. You're not counting how much time has elapsed. You're just in the moment, but you're not asleep. You're very aware of your experiences and even the surrounding, but you're not thinking about that. You're not having any thought, not any intellectual activity, and that's exactly a counterexample to the mark of a mental being intentionality, because that's when someone has a mind without any thought. Of course, it's arguable whether his perception and awareness is already about the world, but I think that maybe that's it could have been an indicative relation, though that's an example, a counterexample to Brentano, I think. That's when we have a mentality without intentionality. And this is the way, if we were to think about the mind as in a metaphysical relation and a set theory, set theoretic mereology, in which members of the set constitute the set, And if a mind is a set, then the mental state is a set that belongs to itself. That kind of reflexivity is that's how I would formalize or characterize the mind, and to explore further. So that's how a mental state that constitutes itself without representing itself. Its constitution need not be a representational relation, and at a time it constitutes itself, and once it constitutes itself through that full self-awareness, but the self is not about the person, but it's the mind self-awareness. Once it sustains that, it also constitutes its reflexivity across time. It's like a sustaining constructive interference of brain waves through, because when people talk about collapse, that's when you like disambiguating something that's in super, if you believe in superimposition, that's a collapse. And then that sustaining brain waves, that's through constructive interference, it just keeps there. But that experience, I hypothesize, need no representation. The meditative experience, it's not intellectual activity, but experiential. And so that's, yes. Okay, so let me, so I have 2 more minutes. I'll summarize briefly. So that's Phenomenality and Accessibility from NetBlock. Of course, he doesn't say explicitly, but I think he's doing philosophy of mind and epistemology. But of course, cognitive science, information processing, and information processing in cognitive science. I think that's almost as if the thing, right? Cognitive science about information processing in the mind, and information, to process information, you need representational state. And then I've gone through perception and emotion to try to highlight that there's this relation, indication relation, instead of a representational relation. So we don't always need information processing for the world to make a difference to our mind, to our decision. So yeah, and having distinguished that, I want to say that the mind, it need not have intentionality in order for a mind to be a mind. And phenomenality, the possibility of having phenomenology, of having there something it is like, of instantiating qualia, that's the mark of the mental. Yeah, that's